But where they planted cover crops by themselves, just radishes, just turnips, just sorghum, they pretty well just burnt to a crisp. But where they mixed them all together, all 8, 10, however many different things they had out there, they just mixed them all together and planted them. They looked pretty good.
You're listening to How I Grow This, exploring stories of gardeners from across the globe as we learn from their biggest tips and tricks to some of the things not to do. I'm your host, Luke Hammond. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the How I Grow This podcast. I'm your host, Luke Hammond, and I am joined today by Keith Berns, one of the founders of one of the most incredible companies that's really just pushing the limits on education and resources regarding cover cropping. And this company is called Green Cover. Keith, you're one of the founders of Green Cover, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Luke. Thanks for having me on. So my brother and I started Green Cover back in 2009, and it's right here on the farm where we live. So it's like right between my house and his house. It's right in the middle of, we still farm, 1,800 acres here in Nebraska, and this cover crop seed company just kind of popped up in the middle, and it's been growing ever since.
Wow. So tell me a little bit about what got you guys into cover cropping. Maybe a lot of people that get into cover cropping, they're trying to address a problem. Was that how it was for you?
Well, kind of. So my brother and I grew up on this farm right here. We're South Central Nebraska for context. And it's the farm that we grew up on. And so we love this place. It's home to us. I went and taught school for 10 years after I graduated. My brother graduated from college and came back to the family farm. And about 10 years after that, I taught school for 10 years. My dad was getting ready to retire. So my brother and my dad were farming together. So at that point, when dad was getting ready to retire, we had the opportunity, my wife and I had the opportunity to come back to the farm. And we decided that, we really wanted to raise the kids, in the country, on the farm. We love that life. And so this would be 1998. We moved back to the farm. And at that point, my brother had already been experimenting with no-till. So, we went 100% no-till in 1998.
That's really early on in the game.
It was pretty early, yeah. And so we got really involved in the no-till organization. So no-till on the plains was very instrumental. I had been doing websites as part of my tech and teaching career. And so I started doing the website for no-till on the plains. My brother was on the board. So we were really plugged in, really connected. We knew Gabe Brown, and we knew all these people who would go on to be superstars of the regenerative ag movement. We knew them before through these no-till organizations. And so then in 2006 was a very pivotal moment for us, for the regenerative ag movement, because in 2006, a man named Ademir Caligari, he's a Brazilian, no-till on the plains, had brought him into Salina, Kansas for the annual conference that we had there. And he started showing pictures of what these guys, these farmers in South America, were doing with multi-species, very diverse cover crops. Because at that point, 2006, people that were doing cover crops, so they might plant a clover, or they might plant oats or sorghum, or it just, one or two things. That was what cover cropping was at that time. But he started showing these pictures of people planting 8 and 10 and 12 different things all together, and was extolling the virtues of this and just, the success stories that these guys in Brazil were having. Now, of course, Brazil, that's not here in the U.S. So it got us all excited, got us all pumped up. Well, at that meeting, Gabe Brown was there and Jay Fuhrer, and they were, both from Burleigh County, North Dakota. So they took those concepts back to North Dakota in 2006, and they planted some test plots in May. 2006 in North Dakota was brutally dry. So by the end of July, they had 3 inches of rain for the whole stinking year, and only 1 inch of rain since they'd planted this cover crop. And so, as you would expect, where they planted these different things by themselves, and these are very famous pictures, I've shown them in my own presentations, hundreds of times, but where they planted cover crops by themselves, just radishes, just turnips, just sorghum, they pretty well just burnt to a crisp, like what you would expect. But where they mixed them all together, all 8, 10, however many different things they had out there, they just mixed them all together and planted them. They looked pretty good on almost no moisture whatsoever. And so that was really earth shattering for so many of us to see how resilient these things were when they worked together, when you put them together. Now, it shouldn't surprise us because, we've all seen, natural prairies and, natural systems. God created these plants to grow together in communities and not in individual culture, man-made habitats, if you will. And so when they started showing those pictures, my brother and I got to thinking, well, would that work for us here in Nebraska? And what we were most concerned about, Luke, was that we were mostly dry land at that time. And so we were very concerned that if we planted this cover crop after we harvested wheat, would it take a lot of the moisture that we were trying to store up for the corn the next year? We couldn't afford that because that was our best chance of growing really good corn on dry land, was to plant it into that wheat stubble. So we decided we need to do our own experiments here in Nebraska. So in 2008, it took us a couple years to actually get everything in place. I wrote a small grant. So we got a SARE grant, Sustainable Ag Research and Education, which, by the way, if anybody's interested, that's a great program. I'm actually on their board now, so I can speak authoritatively. It's a great program if you have a really unique, innovative idea, and don't need a lot of money. So we got like $5,000, not a lot, but it allowed us to buy moisture sensors. So we planted like 20 different strips of cover crops, and we had these moisture sensors at 1 foot, 2 foot, and 3 foot levels. And every hour, it was giving us a reading of how much moisture was in that soil at those depths in each of those plots. And unlike North Dakota in 2006, where they were very dry, we actually had a decent year. We got some decent moisture that year in 2008 here in Nebraska. And so all of the cover crops looked pretty good. They all grew well. They all looked good. But the sensors, what they told us is that any place that we had a cover crop planted by itself, it had used most of that soil moisture. But where we had those cover crops and these diverse mixes, again, 8, 10, 12 different things all growing together, there was just about as much moisture in those plots as there was in bare wheat stubble with nothing growing. Blew our minds. How does that happen?
Right. And people go, why?
Exactly, because we grew lots of biomass. There was lots of stuff there, but it just used the moisture so much more efficiently. And when we saw that, and we saw how well the cattle did, because we had, the rest of that 80-acre field planted to these mixes, and the cattle did incredibly well on that. And it was hard to find seed at that point in time, these 20 different things that we were planting. When we saw all those put together, that was kind of when, we felt like God was telling us this might be an opportunity for us. Because we'd kind of been looking, some of our kids were getting old enough at that time that we wanted to have opportunities for them to come back to the farm if they wanted. And so we either had to significantly increase how much land we were going to farm, or we had to have another enterprise. And at that time, we elected to go with the other enterprise. We started Green Cover in 2009. And so 2009 was the first year we sold enough seed to cover about 1,000 acres, which sounds like a lot, but like half of that was our own. So that was a pretty easy sale. And it was just my brother and I and a couple of the kids. And it's grown now to the point where the last several years, we've moved enough seed out the door to cover well over 1 million acres every year. And we've got 55 really great employees now across a couple different locations, and we're shipping seed out to tens of thousands of customers now every year. So that's kind of how we started. It didn't necessarily start in response to a problem. It really started in response to an opportunity that we saw, not only to start a business, but also to interject all this diversity into our system without hurting what we were already doing.
Right. Well, I would say the problem was you thought you had a moisture problem.
Yeah.
And in response to that moisture problem, you wanted to figure out how we can, increase that moisture and you thought that leaving it bare would probably help, and you were curious based on what you saw, and you formed a hypothesis, and put forth a test, and the results were shocking, right?
As it often is. We're
Yeah,
not as
yeah,
smart as we think we are sometimes.
yeah. Well, oftentimes people are going to think that they're very smart. They're going to form a hypothesis, and before they even finish the experiment, assume that they're correct, and then publish their idea as correct.
Yeah.
So, anyway, that is a total digression. I want to dive in a little bit into if you can explain in a way that only you can the plant and soil relationship between how a plant actually feeds the soil and the soil feeds the plant. If you can help explain that as a baseline, and then we're going to go into a little bit about cover cropping.
Yeah, yeah, that's great, and it's such a fascinating, it's like peeling the curtain back just a little bit into God's creation and looking at how the systems work together, and I know not everybody believes in creation, but for me, it helps so much to look at it as a created system because it makes sense as
Mm,
opposed to something that was just a whole series of happy accidents. But anyway, the plants in the soil and the biology. So there's really three parts of this triangle. You've got your
right.
soil, you've got the plants, and a huge critical part of it is that microbiome, all the other living organisms that make the system alive. So the soil is providing the nutrients. So many of the minerals, the nutrients that our plants need to grow are in our soils. That's what our soils are made up of. But the plants can't get them directly. And there's 30,000 tons of nitrogen above every acre of crop ground in the atmosphere. Our atmosphere is 78% nitrogen, but the plants can't get that directly. That's not the way the system was created. But by utilizing the biology, the plants can get the nitrogen, they can get the phosphorus, the potassium, the iron, the calcium. That's all coming out of your soil system. But when we've removed the biology, then the plants don't have access to any of that. And that's when we have to start putting it all on with, what I call agricultural welfare, because we're giving the handouts. And so that's what the plants are getting. The biology is bringing all of these nutrients from the soil. It's pulling the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, delivering it to the plants. And then in return, because there's no such thing as a free lunch, even in this system, the only way that works is if the plants are willing to pay for or trade all these biological organisms liquid carbon, because these organisms, their food source is carbon. They cannot produce carbon, they can't pull carbon out of the atmosphere, but the plants can. Photosynthesis, CO2 plus H2O equals C6H12O6 and O2. So the plants are taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. They're turning it into glucose, which is a very simple carbohydrate sugar. And then in the course of that plant growing, they turn that glucose into thousands of other carbon compounds. And they're pushing as much as 50% of all the carbon that they make, that plant doesn't use to grow itself. It's using that to feed all of these microbes in the soil that are delivering all these other benefits. And so it's a beautiful system. The plant takes free sunlight, free carbon dioxide, takes some water, with that energy of the sun, and it's turning that into microbe food and essentially purchasing the services of the microbes to deliver nutrients. And also, there's a lot of protection that comes from these microbes as well. So there's good biology, there's bad biology. So in a natural native system, those plants are feeding that biology, and it's just a great example of how God's creation all works together the way it's supposed to. And so really what we're doing as regenerative farmers, what regenerative agriculture is trying to do, is try to get back to those principles, try to emulate as much of that as possible. And so much of it is based on diversity.
Uh-huh.
When we talked initially about the diversity of plants, we see systems grow so much faster when we have a diversity of plants, a diversity of biology, just really makes things explode and work really well together. So that's kind of the relationship between the plants, the biology, and the soil. And I've got a whole talk called Carbonomics that people really enjoy, that kind of goes into all of those relationships a little bit more in depth, because it's really an economy but going on beneath the soil, and there's buying and selling and all these different things. So
Mm-hmm.
you can get on YouTube and search for that if you're interested in taking a little deeper dive into that topic.
Awesome. And where would they find that if they're interested?
Yeah, if you just go, you can go to the Green Cover YouTube channel and search for Carbonomics, or just search for Carbonomics on YouTube. There's 4 or 5 different versions that I've done at different locations out there.
Yeah, and I would highly recommend people watch those talks. I've watched them and benefited tremendously from them. So thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about some pictures and this concept of water
Mhm.
and competition. So we've kind of skimmed the surface through the conversation about um, the more diverse the species are, seemingly the better it actually holds in water within that soil profile. Um, Talk a little bit about. I saw a picture, maybe it was in the Carbonomics, of a roadside and a field on one side that had a major rain event. I think you said it was something like 6 inches of rain, um, and a field on the other side. And you said, well, how much water did they receive? Well, they all received 6 inches of rain, but
Mhm.
how many did you keep? And that was, I think, one of the most tremendous viewpoints of the context and what the crop is for your water holding capacity within that soil profile. Can you speak to that a little bit and kind of describe that situation clearer than I may have
Yeah,
just done?
yeah, that's a great question, Luke. And a lot of times, as farmers, as gardeners, as homeowners, a lot of times we feel like we don't have a lot of control over the weather. I mean, we can't just go out and make it rain, right? And so we feel like we don't have a lot of control over that. And it's true, we don't have a lot of control over the big part of the water cycle. But there's one area of that water cycle that, as landowners, as caretakers of this little piece that God has given us to watch over, we have almost complete control over. And that's how much infiltration do we get. And infiltration is just simply a measurement of, when that precipitation falls, how much of it is going into your soil. And that is almost completely dependent upon the way you're managing your soil. And we've seen great infiltration and we see terrible infiltration. In that picture, that, yeah, it's in that carbonomics talk that you're referring to. This is actually one of our seed growers or customers in Oklahoma, and his neighbor right across the road, 6 inches of rain in an hour. Well, our guy, he got it all, because he's using cover crops, he's integrating livestock, he's got a diverse rotation. He had no water standing in his field whatsoever. The other guy, and the NRCS had just been out and measured infiltration. The neighbor, who is conventional tillage, no livestock integration, pretty much just growing only one crop, only growing wheat, they had measured his infiltration at 6/10 of an inch an hour versus our guy, who was 6 inches. So it's a 10x difference. But when that rain comes all at once, our guy got all 6 inches. And there's 27,000 gallons in an acre inch. So 27,000 times 6 is what he got. The neighbor, with very poor infiltration, he got 27,000 gallons times point 0.6. And the rest
Hmm.
of it went down the ditch. It evaporated. And it's not just that you lose the water, Luke. It's also that, as that water is moving, you're going to have
It's taking
erosion.
debris.
You're going to lose your residue. You're going to leach out your nitrogen. No good thing happens when water leaves your field.
Hmm.
It's multiple bad things that happen.
Hmm.
And so if we can cap, and then that causes flooding. Look
Right.
at how many floods we've seen, in our
Hmm.
nation just recently.
Hmm.
Part of that is because the weather is more erratic, for sure, but part of that too is we've broken the infiltration system, and so the water that should be going into the soil is now going across the soil, and it's concentrating and it's flooding. And so there's a lot of factors, in that, but that is part of it. And so, when people ask you how much rain you got, the only good answer you should ever have is all of it.
Hmm.
I got all of it. And you can only say
Yeah.
that if you can actually infiltrate it. Now, once you get it into your soil, now you have to hold on to it. And that has to do with how much organic matter you have.
Hmm.
Again, about every percent of additional organic matter you have, you can store an additional acre inch of water, more or less, and again, that's 27,000 gallons. So if I've got 3% organic matter and you've got 1% organic matter, my
Hey,
soil,
how'd you know?
it's just a guess, lucky guess. I can hold 54,000 gallons of water per acre
Hmm.
per foot. That's per foot of soil that you can't.
Right.
And so if I'm holding that at, 3 feet deep,
Hmm.
well, what an advantage I have over you, when it comes to
Right.
growing those crops. And
Right.
so again, as our weather has become more sporadic, and you talk to farmers, you'll get all kinds of answers on
Hmm.
climate change, all of these different things, but you'll get almost universal agreement that the moisture events that we do get now are less frequent and they're more intense.
Right.
Almost nobody will argue with that. And that becomes that much more important that we can not only infiltrate it when it comes, but we've got to be able to hold on to it because
Mm.
you don't know when the next rain's coming.
Mm. Now, kind of double clicking into the work of Alan Savory and holistic management and their whole team in regards to the desertification of the world, and these deserts that are expanding. And I happen to live in one in Arizona. And, having grown up in this valley, I see the differences of the rain events that you talk about, changing. We're in that drought. I think I'm at 3.5 inches of rain this calendar year. Um, and when we start looking at that, and we just had one of our major rain events, we had a whole inch in, it was a major, having lived in the Midwest for a decade, it makes me laugh. We had a whole inch, this
Well, no, you
weekend.
say we had a third of our rainfall in one
Yeah,
night. That's what you
yeah,
said.
yeah. It's a totally different game, but it's like, um, you see, these deserts that are so dry, you see all that water wash away
Hmm.
because when there isn't roots within the top sphere, and everything's getting drier and drier, and that crust begins to develop over that desert landscape, that water begins to wash.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
as
Well,
as a
and as a follow up on it, so I live in Webster County, Nebraska. The biggest flood Webster County has ever had was in 1935, right in the middle of the driest, hottest period in record during the Dust Bowl. Because when that rain came, that soil was so beat down, so worn out, so depleted, it couldn't hardly take any of it. And so it is not uncommon to have some of the biggest floods that you see in the midst of very severe droughts.
hmm, that makes me want to, I guess, ask the question and spin off into not a doomsday, but spin off into the it was 100 years ago, and the largest drought on record. Everything was the end. The jackrabbits have taken over, yeah, right? And are we even going to be able to make it? And then things began to turn around. Um, are we in that cyclical pattern right now, 100 years later, where we're starting to face droughts? And then do you think things are going to swing back around, and into more and more? I don't know if I would say even, or what are your observations there?
Well, I mean, it's really easy to identify a cycle 10 years later. It's really hard to see it when you're in the
Right,
midst of it.
right,
So are we in a drought cycle? Well, somebody's always going to be in a drought cycle.
right.
And, Oklahoma and Texas have been very, very dry. They actually got some pretty good rain this year. And so I think the cycle that we're in, at least as I have seen it, is we have lost so much of the consistency of what maybe we used to expect. So even if you're getting your average annual rainfall now, it is
Mm-hmm.
coming in way less consistent timing and in measures. And like I say, it's less frequent and more intense. And so even when we get the moisture, sometimes it comes in amounts or in timing that we most soils can't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just, how much precipitation you get, but it's the timing. It's when you get it. So a good example this year, here in South Central Nebraska, we are below normal rainfall, but we're going to raise above normal crops because when the rains came, they were actually pretty timely this year. Now, some
Mm.
years that doesn't happen, and you can be way above normal rainfall and way above or way below normal crop production because it all came at once or it all came in the wrong time of the year. And so we just, you don't know what the timing is going to be. And that's why soil health and building resiliency into your system is so critical. And I don't care if you're farming 10,000 acres or, 10 square feet in your garden, having that resiliency is so critical to making the system work again, the way that God created it to. And it was never created to have bare soil for extended periods of time. It
Mm.
was created to have, multiple tillage events all in the same year. It was
Mm-hmm.
never created to have just a single type of plant growing year after year after year in the same space. Those are all going against the principles of how the system was created. And when you go against those creation principles, you will always be fighting an uphill battle, and it will get worse and it will get worse and it will get worse, and you'll have to exude and exert more and more outside influence through added fertility, added crop protection, added
Mm.
effort. All of these things get more and more difficult the further we get away from the principles of how the system was created to work. So the closer we can get to that, the less work we have to do, the less inputs that we have to have. And that's why, American farmers are in such a pinch right now. There's huge economic problems in the American agriculture industry. And it's not because we're growing very low yields. We're growing good yields. There's just no money to be made because it costs so much money to grow those yields.
Mm.
And so, one of the big tenets of regenerative farming is you don't necessarily have to produce more than you did before. You just have to produce it with less inputs, less money, and you can become more profitable without ever growing bigger yields if you can figure out
Right.
how to do it, with less inputs. And that's what a lot of regenerative farmers are finding out is that
Right.
it's about growing bigger crops or more crops. It's about growing them for less money, being a lower cost producer so that more of that income can stay in your pocket and not go, to the input suppliers.
Right. Well, you're probably going to be able to track with the math a little bit quicker than I am. But if I'm wrong, correct me on this because I'm not up to date on current pricing. But like right now, soybeans are at what 10.19 a bushel.
Yeah, probably, yeah, around $10, give or take,
Yeah,
depending on
around
where
10
you're at.
bucks a bushel. It's been there, a couple times in the last, 6-10 years down that low. Um, a few years ago, it was up in the 16 range, right?
Hmm. Yep.
So almost 6 times or $6 more per unit, right?
Yeah. Yep.
That's a lot easier to make money when it's when it's 6 times. So for those who don't know, like average bushel of yield, I guess national average, it's anywhere from really bad and poor, like 30 bushel an acre to 90-95 bushel an acre in soybean, right? Is that
Yeah, I would say the
accurate?
national average is probably somewhere between 50 and 60, I
50.
would
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. So if you're bringing in, per acre, what's this math, Keith? You got to probably punch it on a calculator.
Well, yeah, I
Your
mean,
per acre cost, if you're selling it for $10 a bushel and you have 50, you're making $500 an acre.
gross. Yeah.
Gross. So if you're making $500 an acre gross, the measurement is going to be what is your input and your cost to in seed, fertility, management, and trucking, pulling that out of the field. And for most farmers, your note on all your equipment, your note on your land, your note on your grocery bill and your life as well. So it gets really, really tight
Yeah.
in that zone. What are you seeing in guys that have shifted over to this regenerative process? What are they spending per acre on um, on inputs for a soybean crop?
Well, it can really vary.
Right, drastically, but
I had a guy talk to me this year at one of the shows that we went to, and he said, I was growing soybeans by themselves, and he had over $300 an acre in expenses. Now, this is not counting the cost of the land, which can easily, depending on where you're at, that can be $200 to $300 an acre just for that. Uh, it is not uncommon, with soybeans because of how many resistant weeds that are out there. You can spend $100 an acre just trying to kill weeds.
hmm
And so he told me, he had over $300 an acre in that type of a scenario. But he said, but I also had a relay crop field. And what a relay crop field is where in the fall you plant some sort of a cereal. So in his case, he was growing wheat,
hmm
but you could do it with rye, or some guys do it with barley. And then in the spring, you come in and right into that wheat, you plant soybeans. So you're actually growing two crops at the same time.
hmm
And the theory is that you'll harvest the wheat and the soybeans are growing down underneath. And then once you take that wheat off, you harvest the wheat as a cash crop, and then it opens up all the sunlight to get down to the beans, and then they take off and grow. So relay crop, you're growing two crops in 1 year, but there's a period of time when they're both growing at the same time. Well, he told me, he says, Keith, I've got $143 an acre in both of those crops together because I didn't spray it at all, because
Mm.
one's grass, one's a broadleaf. You really can't spray one without killing the other. So he just planted it. So the only cost that he had was the cost of his seed wheat and the cost of his beans. Said I didn't fertilize the wheat because the soybeans are making nitrogen and helping that out. Didn't use any herbicides because, I didn't need to, because the wheat was providing weed suppression for his beans. And he's just saying, I'm going to have, probably 2/3 of a good wheat crop and 3/4 of a good soybean crop. And I'm going to be so much further ahead. But even if he didn't have those good of yields, the fact that he's doing it so cheaply is making that look really, really attractive. And so he's going to be doing a lot more of that concept next year and a lot less of just conventional. Now, is that going to work for everybody? Well, probably not, but should we all be at least thinking outside the box and trying things like that? I think we'd be foolish if we didn't, because, we
Right.
don't have to do that across the whole farm. He started on one field to see what it would look like, and he's liking what he sees. And so,
So is he strip tilling that, or where is he putting? What's he drilling the wheat in at what combination, and how is his travel for bringing the combine in to harvest that wheat head?
yeah, yeah. So what a lot of people will do is when they plant their cereal grain in the fall, they'll leave strips where the soybeans will be planted the next year. That's probably the best way to do it. He
Yep.
wasn't set up to do that, so he just planted his wheat solid straight across, and
Mm.
then he just planted his soybeans right into it.
Hmm.
Now, the
Hmm.
soybeans get planted in like 30-inch rows, so
Mhm.
that when you run your combine through to harvest the wheat, your combine tires aren't running over the soybeans.
Mhm.
And so you're not harming that. Now, when you plant the soybeans, you're running over a bunch of wheat, but it's young enough at that point, it kind of pops back up and doesn't really kill it. So
Bounce back.
so
Hmm.
again, I love that's one of the greatest things about the business that we're in. We work with some of the smartest, cleverest, most creative guys out there, and we learn so much just from what they're doing.
Mhm.
You should be way smarter than we are because we're learning so much from our customers. But it's just refreshing to hear stories like that of, what could it be?
Mhm.
What could it be if we think a little different, if we think outside the box? And that's just one example of many that are out there of how when we stop thinking about doing things the same way we've always done it, or the same way that our neighbors are doing it, or frankly the same way that the government programs are trying to push us into doing, uh,
Mm,
there's some pretty cool things that can happen.
yeah. Well, I want to zoom in a little bit to the diversity of these cover crops and the selection therein. And then I want to kind of spin off specifically for incorporating these into, vegetable gardens. How
Mm-hmm.
do we incorporate some of these cover cropping techniques into vegetable gardens? Because many people are just in raised beds and they go, well, I don't really have a space for incorporating a cover crop, and what even is a cover crop, and am I doing that? Am I okay? And so, can you speak to uh, let's begin transitioning into that zone of vegetable and diversity and selection of a cover crop.
Yeah. Well, first of all, from the diversity standpoint, again, there's just a great variety of plants that we use as cover crops. We have over 100 different types of plants, different types of seeds here that we can sell as cover crops. Some of them work really well in the heat. Some of them work really well in the cool. Some of them will, work with bacteria to produce nitrogen. Some will do better with phosphorus. Some are great at weed control. Some are excellent for grazing, and some aren't. So it really there is cover crops to fit just about every need that you have. We just put this book out, this Cover Crops 101, that has just a really good overview of cover crops. And one of the examples that we use is the Swiss Army knife. You've got
Mm-hmm.
all these different tools on one knife. And so we just go through each one of these tools as a different benefit that cover crops can bring to the table. And it's not the same cover crop. It might be different things or different combinations based on what you want to try to do or what you want to accomplish. So the first thing is knowing what you want to try to accomplish and then figuring out which cover crops can help you do that. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
important that you do that and you don't just say, well, I read about cover crops. They sound pretty cool. I should
We
probably
need
do
to
it.
do it.
Yeah, we need to
Let's
do
do
it.
it.
So understand, are you wanting to produce nitrogen, or is weed control more important? Is erosion? Are you trying to graze some animals out there? And you don't have to big area. I had a guy, he actually, he actually was in Haiti, and he sent me pictures of him rotationally grazing rabbits through his yard. And it was not a very big yard, but he was planting cover crops and giving these rabbits just a small area every day and moving them around. The principle is the same as if you had 500 cows out there. Uh,
Uh-huh.
those regenerative grazing principles are the same. So you got to know what you want to try to accomplish, and then you can start deciding which cover crops are going to work for you. And so as we look at this, and I don't know that it makes a huge amount of difference whether you're doing it in a raised bed vegetable garden or you're doing it, on a quarter section of ground. A lot of these decision making principles are going to remain the same. Again, the first thing is you have to know what you want to try to accomplish. Secondly, you have to know when you're going to plant, because that's going to determine a big part of, can I use cool season things? Can I use warm season things? You have to know how you're going to terminate it. And
Mm,
actually, the smaller your area, you have a huge benefit there, because you can do some really labor intensive manual termination techniques that you could never do on large scale. So it actually gives you a little more flexibility, like tarping or like, foot cramping or, the things like that, you just would not be practical on a large scale. You can get away with some of those things. I actually, when I seed my garden down, I seed it heavy with cereal rye and hairy vetch and winter clovers and things like that. And then I let it grow up pretty tall in the spring, and I go out there and I roll it down with my lawnmower. I don't have the blade turned on because I don't want to chop it up. I want it to stay, long and stringy. But I just run my lawnmower over it about 10 times, and it eventually flattens it pretty good. And then I can cover it up with some cardboard and some straw. And now I've got like 3 layers of weed protection. You just cut down through that, plant your transplants right into that. And man, you got pretty good weed control, because now you got all
mm,
that mulched cover crop. You've got a layer of cardboard and then some straw. So that's just one example of what you can do on a small scale that you couldn't really do on a large scale. So, uh, what we have done to help out the smaller scale, whether you're a gardener or a homesteader, or maybe even just have some small fields, we've gone to where we have what we call pre-made mixes.
Hmm.
So we know what a lot of the goals that people are going to have are. And so we've got like 50 some different pre-made mixes now. So you don't have to create your own mix from scratch. You just have to know, well, I want to produce nitrogen and it's going to be through the fall and the winter. Or I really have problems with, mare's tail, and I need to just really suppress that weed in the fall and in the spring. And so, grazing, there's all sorts of different goals. So we have these different pre-made mixes, and we sell them, in small packages. You can get, I think, packages as small as 1 pound on Seed Time,
Yep.
with some of these mixes for the overwintering mix or the fall soil builder. Again, different seasons, different purposes, but each one of those is going to have probably anywhere from 8 to 12 different species that have been selected to fit the time of the planting, but then also the goals of why it would be planted for, protecting that soil from the rainfall, for, boosting the biology, for feeding that biology, producing some nutrients, cycling the nutrients that you already have out there. So those mixes, we've put those together based on what we've seen and what we know, again, across millions of acres at this point.
Hmm.
But the scale doesn't matter because the principles work the same in your backyard as they do in the back 40.
Hmm.
So the principles work regardless of the scale. And so we've just tried to make it a little more convenient for the small scale grower to have access to some of these seeds and seed mixes.
Gotcha. Now, you talked a little bit about inoculated seed and what that can do for really enhancing the genetic potential of that seed. I know it's very common in large scale agriculture, and it's becoming more adapted in small scale production. And you guys work with a company AEA, to where you guys are inoculating a lot of your seed. Um, Talk a little bit about what that does at germination and the enhancement of the genetic potential of that seed crop.
Well, like I mentioned, in this economy that's going on in the soil, you've got the plants, you've got the biology, and you've got the soil. Now, if you're in a really worn out environment where you have that soil is not carrying a lot of biology, the plant needs to bring that with it. Otherwise, it's just really, really going to struggle. Now,
Hmm.
God designed plants to be, I think, actually really pretty smart because the plants are incorporating biology right into the seed.
Mm.
So if you take one single seed grown in a really good, healthy, regenerative type environment, Dr. Christine Jones, who is just one of the smartest people we've ever met and had talked to us about soil health, she says that can have up to 6 trillion microbes in and on that seed. And it's not just on the seed coat, but they're
Right.
actually will be inside the seed. And as that plant is growing, it's taking the biology that's in the soil and it's bringing some of it up. It's figuring out how to put these biological organisms into a very stable stasis condition, storing it in the seed and on the seed coat so that now they're completely dormant and they're just going to sit there and they're going to wait. And then when that seed germinates, boom, that biology goes into action. So the seed is bringing some of the biology to the party itself.
Hmm.
But if you're buying seed that was grown in a very conventionally farmed system that doesn't have a lot of biology, that was, grown with heavy doses of outside inputs, so that it wasn't pulling things from the soil, it was pulling things out of a jug. It'll have some biology, but it won't have nearly as much. And so in either situation, we like to supplement what the seed naturally has with what we call biological inoculants. And so there are several different categories. Rhizobia bacteria are one of the most important if you're using legumes, because a legume like a bean or a pea or alfalfa, a lot of times people say, well, they can make their own nitrogen. Well, no, they can't. Those plants cannot do anything with all that atmospheric nitrogen. But what they can do is they can form very close associations with these special bacteria called rhizobia, which can take that atmospheric nitrogen, because there's a nitrogen in the atmosphere. It's two nitrogen molecules that are bonded to each other, and that makes it inert. So you breathe it in. Every time you take a breath, you're breathing 78% nitrogen. It does nothing to you because the nitrogen molecules are tied together, and it makes them completely inert to us, but also the plants. The plants can do nothing with that. So you got to pull those nitrogen molecules apart, and they're connected with three sets of covalent bonds. So very, very strong, very, very stable. It takes a lot of energy to break that bond, but these little tiny bacteria can do it. They're producing the right enzymes, the right chemicals, and they can break that bond and then make that nitrogen available to the plant. So you got to have that bacteria, and we like to put that right on the seed. But in addition to that, there's lots of other organisms that will break that nitrogen bond, but they don't have to be associated with just legume plants. So things like azospirillum and zotobacter, and they're just discovering new ones all the time that can fix that nitrogen for a grass plant or for a non-legume broadleaf plant. So we like to put those on there as well. And there's other types of bacteria that will make phosphorus more available in your soil. There's mycorrhiza fungi, which extend the root system of any plant and make it, infinitely more efficient at pulling water and nutrients out of your soil. So there's all of these things, and they can all be added. So BioCoat Gold is a good example. The AEA product that you referenced, it's got some of the mycorrhiza. It's got, probably 20 other really good beneficial bacteria. We have a product called Elevated Fungi, which has thousands of different species of biology in it, and it's a liquid, and it's relatively inexpensive, and we're spraying that on all of our seed. So if you're getting our seed through Seed Time, it's going to have those inoculants already on the seed in the bag, ready to go. So if you're planting seed that does not have adequate biology, that seed is always going to struggle. It's going to struggle to germinate, and it's going to struggle to thrive early on. And with any plant, if it struggles early on, it's going to be really difficult for it to realize its full potential later on. And so it's no different than people. A child that is neglected and abused and has lots of issues and is those early developmental stages will likely have lingering chronic effects all of their life. And it's the same way with plants. So we really need to make sure that seed gets off to a good start. We give it the best environment as possible. Having good soil is one way to start. But until you have the best soil that you can, you need to get as much biology on that seed to give it the quickest start as possible.
Man, that was excellent. Let's just say we are in a smaller backyard context. We have a lot of things we may be trying to do, and we've got excess phosphorus, which is kind of common in a lot of backyard gardens and with different composts that may have been over applied where you may have high biology, but you still have excess phosphorus. What's some of the right cover crops to lean on when you have super high levels of phosphorus? A lot of gardeners struggle with this across America that I've seen.
Yeah. So you're saying you have too much phosphorus in the soil.
Too much phosphorus.
Too much phosphorus. When it comes to questions like this, I like to say I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that. So what we do is we like to go with a lot of diversity, because what you'll find if you use, so let's just take our Cool Season Soil Builder mix, for example. It's probably got 10 different things in it. Well, you can plant that same mix in, 10 different gardens, or you might even plant it in your garden at 10 different times or 10 different years, and it will look different every time. And it's not because it's got different seeds or different amounts of seeds. It's because the environment is going to tell those plants which ones need to really express themselves, which ones really need to kick it in gear and get going. And so if you've got excess phosphorus, I would say you need a lot of grasses, a lot of, cereals, because they're going to be pretty heavy users of phosphorus. They're not necessarily known for making more phosphorus available, like a buckwheat plant would, for example. But they'll be heavy users of the phosphorus, and those plants that use the most will probably do the best.
Uh-huh.
And the other thing is, as you build your soils, it is amazing how much of a buffer carbon is. And your soils can tolerate much more extremes, whether it's extremes in pH or extremes in excesses or the absence of certain nutrients. All of that will be buffered and remediated by having higher organic matter levels, which is the best measure of carbon. So when you have higher carbon in your soil, all of those things matter a little bit less because that carbon is allowing that plant to buffer itself right in that rhizosphere. It's allowing it to feed the biology that helps to protect and buffer it. And so, you can see plants grow really well, in the midst of a lot of pathogens or in the midst of toxic levels of some of these other nutrients that they may die or be sick in 1%. Sorry to keep bringing that back up. We're
Yeah, rub it in.
organic matter soils versus 3 or 4%. They will act completely different because of the amount of carbon that you have in there. But here's the good thing: you can all add carbon to your soil, and the smaller the scale that you're doing it at, the quicker you can do it. We farm 1,800 acres. I can't just go out and put tons and tons of carbon on every acre every year. But in my garden, I can, because I'm adding a thick layer of straw mulch. I'm
Uh-huh.
growing this big cover crop. I can bring in compost. I can do lots of things to bring carbon in. One of the things, David Montgomery is a great author. If you haven't read any of his books, you really should. But in one of his books, he and his wife, Ann, they were, I think they're in Seattle. Uh, they started with just really, really crappy soil, and they got all the coffee grounds that they could find from people and all other kinds of food scraps. And they started composting, and they just started adding all this. And they went from having, just essentially a rock backyard to having beautiful soil in a fairly short period of time, much, much faster than we could do it at large scale because of
Uh-huh.
their ability to import carbon pretty
Uh-huh.
easily.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's one of those things where the smaller scale you are, the more advantage you do have. The quicker you can get a response. The larger scale, the more you can do it. It's just very, very costly,
Yeah.
and it gets harder and harder and harder.
Yeah. And the
Um,
other thing I would say is, if you've got high phosphorus soils, it's probably because you've been adding manure, compost, things like that, that generally are pretty rich in that. So I think what you need to do is you need to figure out how to get sources of carbon and nitrogen into your soil system that is not going to continue to add lots of phosphorus. And
right,
so, that may mean you need to not be adding manure as your nitrogen source. You need to be growing that with legumes now
right.
instead. And so, you just, in order to solve a problem, you have to stop causing the problem first. And so
Oh,
if that's part of the cause, is that you're bringing in lots of compost every year to get the nitrogen, well, all that phosphorus is building up, and phosphorus doesn't leach away like nitrogen does. And that's why almost any farm around a dairy has huge amounts of phosphorus in it, because they keep spreading manure year after year after year because it's convenient.
right, right. In this case, it just happens to be there. It's a very interesting thing. Like I said, my organic matter I think is around 1.4%. Um, and we're in uh, a watershed and an interesting thing below a mining town. So I've got um, 10 parts per million of copper. I've got a lot of interesting dynamics going on. I've got really high zinc. Um, and I've got really low iron, really low manganese. It's a very interesting soil type that I'm working with here. Um, Having just transitioned a soil at my farm in Missouri from 2% organic matter to 6, now I'm trying to transition this farm from 1.4 to wherever we can get to.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
have, I think we're in like the 300s of phos. And so now I'm really trying to figure out these sourcings and how can I, in an Arizona climate, get carbonaceous material to break down at speed when I don't have the moisture. Because for those of you who don't know, like a dry climate, a brittle climate, if you don't have that moisture to begin to break down these microbes, even in your compost, we basically could spread wood chip out of a hardwood and it'll stay out. It's not going to decompose and break down there because the biology goes into like beef jerky mode. It dehydrates, and so we've got some challenges ahead that I think cover cropping is going to be a big piece of our success down the road. For at least this farm that I'm currently on. So
Hmm.
I'm going to
Yeah,
be
no,
consulting with you.
I would agree with that. Yeah, you have to, and even under a cover crop, the example from North Dakota in 2006 is a good example of this. In that diverse environment, there's lots of mechanisms that are making this happen. And again, I'm not smart enough to explain them all, but somehow it's doing a lot with very little moisture. It's cycling that, it's
Mhm.
recycling that, it's becoming incredibly efficient at doing that. So I would err on the side of a lot of diversity with your cover crop mixes. And if you can find sources of carbon, now putting wood chips out there, can be a little risky because if you get too much carbon without enough nitrogen, then you
Mhm.
throw things way out of whack and it may take years to recover from something like that.
Mhm.
So you have to be careful that you don't just, I'm going to dump, 8 inches of wood chips out there and think that I solved my problem.
Right.
You could cause more by getting things out of balance even more than they are.
Right. It all depends on that context. So the other issue that we have, and that's a popular thing in market garden world, is dumping wood chips and creating wood chip pathways. But then people go through and they don't think of it as just a pathway, and it breaking down and cycling in through slow incorporation. They end up year after year, they might till that into their soil, and then they get into much heavier problems later. The other problems that this particular location has is I've got every horrible noxious weed on under the sun. I fight Johnson grass, I fight Bermuda, I fight goat heads, I fight sandburrs, I fight pigweed, like crazy in these soils because the nature skin is trying to heal itself and keep itself covered, and that's part of the great challenge of this farm is figuring out how to manage the weeds while still building in health and resilience into these soils. So,
Yeah, but
what do you?
you don't have to scoop snow, Luke.
Oh, there's the advantage right there. I don't have to scoop snow. It's worth it. Fight everything in the summer and then not get the winter break to
Yeah,
sled.
have 11 months of summer.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. Oh, it's so good. Well, thank you so much, Keith. This has been just a wonderful conversation, and I hope people enjoyed it as they hopefully are inspired to dig into cover cropping and incorporate that into their gardens. I know that um, we're trying to do our best with our context and where we're delivering, um, both in me in a small scale farm in Arizona right now, and you in a large scale farm in Nebraska, and helping thousands and thousands of growers across North America. I don't. Are you guys shipping to a bunch of other countries right now, or is it just North America?
Oh, it's mostly North America. I mean, we've got some small amounts going here and there, but the shipping and the particularly the regulations on shipping
Right,
live
seed.
seed into other countries
Hmm.
is generally deal breakers for most of that.
Right. So, for people who want to learn more about cover crop, where can they direct to your guys' resources that are available?
Sure. Yeah. The best place is start at our website, greencover.com. We've got all kinds of resources on there. You can download soil health resource guides, which you can see some in my background here. We publish one of these every year. We've got this Cover Crops 101 book. I think you can download the PDF of this for free if you want, or you can buy printed copies of that. Our YouTube channel, we've got over 400 videos on there now for some of them that we do, and then some of them that we have people like Gabe Brown and Christine Jones and Ray Archuleta. We may not be the smartest people in the room, but we know the smartest people. So we lean heavily on them, and a lot of the articles and our resource guides are written by them. So we try to bring all of that together through webinars, through podcasts, through blogs, through these publications. So that's a great place to start. And then, if you continue to have questions, we're happy to, visit with folks, and you can buy seed right on Seed Time and, really small, convenient packages for the backyard gardener or, homesteader. So yeah, take advantage of those resources, put the work in, just like anything else, you're going to get as much out of it as what you're putting into it. And so, we know that people who are passionate about the soil are passionate about learning more about it. So some really good resources there to start with.
Awesome. Everybody, that was Keith Berns with Green Cover. And the How I Grow This podcast is brought to you by Seed Time. As Keith referenced several different times, Seed Time is a garden planning software that helps you plan and stay on track in your garden. So if you haven't yet created a calendar, it's absolutely free. Always for the basic level. So we want to make sure that you're getting in the garden and getting the resources you need. And if you choose to upgrade into one of the paid versions, you have a lot more features like layout, inventory, and so much more that's on the radar that we're working on and developing as we speak. So thank you so much for joining in. It means the world to me, and just pushing this podcast out there. If you like, share, and subscribe with maybe a friend who might learn something new from this interview with Green Cover. So thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next week as we have new episodes dropping every single week. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Luke.